NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. Israeli media reports that body parts handed over by the Red Cross do not belong to any of the missing hostages after forensic examinations were completed. The transfer had followed Israel's return of 30 Palestinian bodies to Gaza, a move seen as part of efforts to sustain the fragile ceasefire despite deadly recent strikes. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung on the final day of the APEC summit, his final visit to South Korea in over a decade. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney confirms he apologised to President Donald Trump over an anti-tariff ad featuring Ronald Reagan that sparked a diplomatic row. Trump responded by slapping an extra 10% tariff on Canadian goods and freezing trade talks, which Carney says will resume when Washington is ready. China's military says it monitored and tracked a joint Philippine patrol in the disputed South China Sea on October the 30th and the 31st, calling it a threat to stability. The statement comes as the US and Philippines strengthen defence ties, announcing a new joint task force to operate in the strategic waterway. Russia's defense ministry says its air defenses destroyed 98 Ukrainian drones overnight across multiple regions, including 6 targeting Moscow. The incident marks one of the largest reported wave of drone attacks this year as Kiev intensifies strikes deep inside Russian territory. Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan secures over 95% of the vote in a landslide election victory, state TV reports amid an ongoing internet blackout. The result comes after days of deadly protests, with the opposition claiming hundreds killed and the UN reporting credible evidence of at least 10 deaths. The G7 energy ministers condemn Russia's attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, calling them devastating and unjustified. Kyiv labels the strikes as nuclear terrorism, saying they threaten millions as Moscow intensifies drone and missile attacks on power facilities. President Donald Trump designates Nigeria as a country of particular concern over religious freedom violations, opening the door to possible sanctions. Trump claims Christians face an existential threat, while Nigeria denies the allegations. Now we start this hour with some breaking news. Reports have come in that body parts recently transferred to Israel do not belong to any of the hostages that Hamas have said to returned. The remains were handed over by the Red Cross earlier this week as part of the ongoing exchange process under the US brokered ceasefire deal. Forensic tests are continuing to determine the identities, but initial results indicate the body parts are unrelated to any of the Israelis still listed as missing or captive in Gaza. Okay, a huge update there. We are now joined by Major General Sudhakar Ji, a senior geopolitical and strategic defense expert, joining us from New Delhi to discuss this further. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Of course, a huge development. We heard that Israel had, that Hamas had delivered the said remains to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross delivered said remains to Israel. Unsure whether remains were the Israeli hostages, and we have now confirmed that they are indeed not part of that cohort of hostages still to be returned to Israel under the ceasefire deal. Major General G, how do you think Israel is going to respond to this? Obviously, we've seen strikes previously when Hamas has handed over remains which were not Israeli hostages. Do you think we can expect the same this time?
Yeah, Thomas, good afternoon for getting me for your show. quite a tricky question, sensitive, and it has to be handled with lots of maturity and care. And my personal take on the whole issue is that the recipient has got primacy over the entire subject. If Israel says no, well, then the Palestinians have to reconsider, the Hamas have to take a relook. And since it is happening, as I understand from your question, there is a third party, international neutral party, Red Cross. The Red Cross indulgence in the subject has to be taken into consideration. Their support has to be dovetailed, and only then some kind of a resolution can be found from this sensitive impasse which has come about. And also, these kind of things in the past, to the best of my knowledge, have led to triggers for new offensive or counter-offensive on either side. Therefore, we got to play it with due care and caution and lots of regards to the norms and conventions on the subject, because I also fail to understand if the body is, the leftover of the body is not tallying with any DNA or any match. Well, the solution has to be resolved mutually between all the parties and coordinated by some neutral agency like Red Cross. Back to you, Thomas.
Yes, and of course, Hamas and people working in Gaza are facing serious difficulties in retrieving the remains of the bodies, of course, from the rubble that is now the Gaza Strip, 80% of which, over 80% actually, has been destroyed by Israeli forces and airstrikes. What are some of the challenges that Hamas faces in keeping their end of the deal, and particularly in retrieving the remains from the Gaza Strip and returning them to Israel, so families in Jerusalem and beyond can mourn properly?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree with what you say. 80% has been devastated. I am given to understand, as per the latest input, the Israeli Defense Force is in occupation of Gaza in 55% of the entire area. How far it is true, one doesn't know. The media, I only hope and pray they get free access to it. But under the circumstances, you have a point. When the bodies and the mortal remains have to be pulled out from under the rubble, you really can't say with surety whether it belongs to them or not. So you are only making a wild guess. There are no fact checks available. There is no ready reckoner or inventory of personalities who are there under the rubble. So under these circumstances, some kind of a wire media has to be worked out, and correct identity based on the DNA analysis has to be established. And I think the Red Cross has to play a very important role and bigger role than any of the stakeholders onto either side. Back to you, Thomas.
Yes, Major General G, do stay with us as we have some further news updates coming this time.